Chester's house was a boxy little ranch home. Robin's egg blue, a small but tidy yard. And inside there wasn't much by way of decor, but there were stacks of books, newspapers, magazines everywhere. We sat down in the kitchen as he poured a glass of iced tea from a pitcher in the fridge, then dumped a healthy pour of rum in the glass, swirling it around with his finger, sampling it, and sitting down. You know that old cliche of how, as someone gets older, they've forgotten more than other people know, he said. I've had so many moments in my years living here where I wondered if something I was seeing was real or just the result of too much alcohol. My brain just trying to fill in the gaps of things I'd forgotten or tried to forget. So if I ever see your dad again, I need to thank him for making me feel like I still had something to offer. I need to know what you know about my dad and where he might be, I said. I'm sorry to say I don't have much on that, Chet replied. He did most of the talking the few times we chatted at the bar. I will tell you everything I told him. Guessing someone pointed him in my direction the way they did with you, but I don't know what it would have been. Hard to say around here. Have you always lived in Chancellor? I asked. Nope, Chet said. Phoenix, Arizona, originally. I was a math kid. I thought I'd get rich finding some solution to a great numerical mystery. Physics, data science. Back before that was a thing, Amazon could use to sell shit, right? I was at Los Alamos, early 70s. With those last few Oppenheimer guys trying to see what else we could turn into a fucking weapon. What brought you here? I said. The short version? He chuckled. Cocaine. Some of my colleagues, the younger ones, the more restless among us who didn't have the patience we thought we had for statistics and studying nuclear energy and all that. They kept weird hours, ended up down their own personal rabbit holes. Mine was Area 51 for a while. Not long, and I didn't learn anything. I drank too much, started partying a little too hard, decided to get my act together right around the time my parents died. 79 by then. They were in Peoria. I ended up here. Got on the radio. Late shift. No one wanted that job. No one really listening. So I started doing my own thing. I thought I'd be the next Art Bell, you know? See what I could find out from other people about some of the things I'd heard over the years. You know, doing what I did. It was fun until I got fired. Well, asked to retire. And why'd you get fired? I replied. You know, Paul, you can only go so far saying crazy shit before people make judgment calls about you, he sighed. Even if said crazy shit is happening right in front of them. Does John Bellringer have anything to do with this crazy shit? I said. Do you know him? Does he live here in Chancellor? Does he figure into this Margaret Summers thing? God, Margaret, he sighed. Her parents used to go to my church. I mean, I haven't been to church in years, but back when I did, they had just gotten married. Nice people. I'll lay even odds they've talked to Bellringer. I don't even think that's the name he calls himself. I think someone gave him that name, but I guess it doesn't matter. I believe there are others like him, though. You've heard of William Petchel from around Memphis, I believe? Someone they call the January Stranger outside of Lafayette, Louisiana. Indrid Cold, Point Pleasant, Virginia. Indrid Cold, yeah, I'm familiar, I replied. Sure, he replied. The rest are like him, I guess, if we can say that any of them are the same. Bellringer's different. He's not from around here would be the polite way to say it. What's the non-polite way? I said. He's not like we are, Paul, he replied simply. I don't believe he's a person. So what, he's a ghost? I said, unable to keep the incredulous laughter from my voice. Chet laughed in turn. No, not a ghost. Not in the way we use that term, like that's the only thing it can be, like something on TV. Chet sipped his spiked tea. You a religious man, Paul? You believe in God? No, I replied. I mean, I don't care either way, you know, if you believe in that sort of thing. You have any faith at all in anything? He asked. I'm not asking as a preacher. I don't know, I said. If I do or not, Chet, I don't know. He stared thoughtfully into space and stroked his stubble with his thumb. I don't think I do anymore. Have any faith, that is, but that's its own kind of problem, I've discovered. The double-edged sword of faith, Paul, is that we end up only considering things in terms of what we think we know as believers or non-believers. Let's say I'm watching a movie. It's about aliens. Okay, now whatever I see in that movie, whether I consciously realize it or not, that's how I'm going to think about aliens. Unconscious, whatever you want to call it. There's a good chance now that I'm going to default to whatever I saw there when I think about aliens because I have no actual real-world context for an alien, and my imagination is now hampered by what it has in hand. You get me? I'm forced to speculate quickly, and that speculation forms my unconscious and, by extension, my conscious thoughts of the thing. So, Bellringer is an alien. That's what you're telling me, I replied. And he's, what, here to destroy Chancellor? I was starting to get annoyed, but I was also mildly amused. No offense, you might as well say he's Bigfoot. None taken, and I don't know what he is, Chet replied. I don't know that he's any more or less real than Bigfoot, if we're going with that example, and I certainly don't think he's an angel or an alien. All I know is that he arrives sometimes. Do I think he wants to destroy us? Not really, no. When he comes to town, things happen. And sometimes he tells people things. Sometimes good things, sometimes bad things. What does that mean? I said. What, he sees the future? Who can tell? Chet replied. Have you ever spoken to him? I paused. Outside, the wind picked up and began to rip through the trees. Through the window near where we sat, I could see the quiet, empty street. Once, I replied, recalling the day I encountered the man at the bus stop, dressed as Bellringer had been described, as he'd been, at least from a distance, the night Vicky and I followed Van. But what were the odds of that? How was that possible? What did he say? Chet said, a childlike curiosity in his voice. He said a biblical quote, I replied. There came two angels to Sodom at evening, he said, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. Genesis 19. Other weird nonsense. It often does appear that way, though that makes some sense, Chet said. The First Congregational Church of God out west of town burned down in the early 80s. That was on its sign the last week it was open for services, and it stayed on that signboard for years. He picks things up here and there, it seems. He holds on to things. He was here a lot around that time. What else? Knocking, I thought, remembering that day at the bus stop. I could see him, I could hear him speaking. But it was as though there was static laid over the memory, something that wouldn't let details through, and I really had to grind the gears in my head to remember the words that had come out of his mouth. He said something about someone knocking on the door. Knocking, Chet repeated. Any trace of levity went out of his face, and he stared solemnly into his lap. He gulped the rest of his tea and pursed his lips, staring down at the table as though deep in thought as he mixed a refill from the pitcher and fifth. I think you've caught his attention, Paul. I mean, you certainly have by now, coming here on the heels of your dad. What does that mean, caught his attention? I said. Do you think he took my dad somewhere? Margaret? No, I don't. He drank. But he's sort of the one who opens the door, I guess you'd say. Door to what? I replied. That, he said with a tired smile, the drink starting to tug on his eyelids. That is the question to answer, I guess. I am ashamed that I can't after all these years, though I have bits and pieces. How long has he been coming here? I said. Okay. I will tell you all I have on this, Chet said, exhaling with a shudder. His hands were trembling a little. And all I ask of you is that you remember it. Okay. Okay, I agreed. I mean it, he said. Write it down. Your dad, he wrote things down. Why do you think he did that? He did that for work. He did it all the time, I said. And I thought of the report from Dr. Gordon's office. Memory loss. Lost time. He was losing things. He was. Yeah, Chet replied. He can thank John Bellringer for that too, I think. Chet sat back in his chair and closed his eyes as he talked. I guess I can too. He laced his fingers together and put his hands behind his head like someone's grandpa getting ready to deliver an uplifting chestnut of knowledge. All right, as far as I know, Bellringer first showed up here in 44. I've heard he was here earlier than that, but I've never talked to anyone who knows for sure. World War II was wrapping up, soldiers coming home, trying to reconnect with anything like a normal life after the insanity they witnessed. There's a young man from right here in Chancellor, coming home from the Pacific Theater, named Adam Hannes, born and raised here. He had a young wife waiting for him. The Hannes family was somewhat known. They had a bit of money. Nothing like what we mean when we say that today, but a bit of money. And they'd invested it in the McCann factory out here. Did a lot for those good old days we talk about, let me tell you. Did great things for the local economy. Adam probably had PTSD, to be honest, though of course we didn't talk about that back then either. By all counts, I think he was feeling pretty good about being back in the States, about to be with his wife, live the family life, The American dream, I replied. Such as it is, yeah, the American fucking dream. Chet's face fell into that deep, troubled thoughtfulness I'd seen briefly before. So Adam's coming home on a bus from Chicago to Macomb. And he meets this man on the bus. Starts talking to him about the war, asking about the things he saw, that sort of deal. Casual, kind of conversation you just end up in with a stranger sometimes when you're traveling long distance. He's asking about where Adam's from. Adam tells him about Chancellor. Well, then this guy starts saying all kinds of weird things that just don't make any sense. Like what? I asked. Talking about animals that don't exist? Chet replied casually. Things in history, things that hadn't happened yet but have since. Adam wrote a lot, too. He kept journals during the war that he brought home, and they actually ended up in our library before someone stole them a long time ago. But he talked about all this stuff in there. Is he still around? Can I talk to him? No. Chet got up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a sugar bowl, stirring a teaspoon into his glass of boozy tea and testing it before continuing. But you're jumping ahead, Paul. Let me get this out. I told your dad all this a few months ago, but he was already pretty far gone. I can't trust that he documented it all. I don't think I'm leaving anything out. I hope I'm not. So, Hannes gets to Macomb. He and this guy part ways. He blows it off as just a weird story, and he has someone waiting to bring him home from the bus station in Macomb. There's a place out on the edge of town here, right at Rural Route 4 and Powick Road. Nickname is the Howling Bridge. One of those local legend kind of places. The story goes there used to be a werewolf back in the pioneer days that haunted this particular stretch of land, and they built a bridge over where the locals buried it after they trapped it in a homemade sinkhole and killed it with a silver crucifix. Supposedly on nights of the full moon you can hear it howling from under the ground, this undead wolf man. You have it in you to believe in an undead wolf man, Paul? Me neither. Well, I shrugged. We used to push a legend about vampires being buried in a cemetery outside of Galesburg, so I can appreciate that. The Church of the Open Mind, he laughed, then leaned in, clearing his throat as he continued. So, Adam is riding past the Howling Bridge on his way into Chancellor, and who does he see walking down the highway? His traveling companion, just ambling along the road. Hannes has his driver pull over, and he gets out and says, What are you doing here? The guy says, Well, you spoke so highly of Chancellor, I thought I'd have a look at it myself. It starts to rain, and Adam pulls his jacket up over his head, but this guy isn't even getting wet. It's like he's immune to rain. And he says, Well, I guess I better be going. I'll see you soon. And he walks off, goes under the Howland Bridge, and sits down like he was just taking shelter from the rain. My dad mentioned a bridge to his doctor, I said. Long story, but would it have been this howling bridge? It'd be pretty damn coincidental if it wasn't, Chet shrugged. So there was a parade for Adam Hannes a few days later. The VFW in Macomb had built a float for him, which he said in the newspaper made him uncomfortable, but he was flattered and thought it wonderful of the town, which it was. He had a good job at McCann as a foreman. Carol was a stay-at-home. She had the same routine every day. Adam left in the morning. Carol kept the house, that kind of thing. They were that way for a while. Chet finished his tea and got up to set his glass in the sink. He stared out the kitchen window for a few minutes as though lost in thought, then went on, still watching, with his back to me. Adam was late one night, according to some of his work friends. They typically tried to hit the point house after work, but he was later than usual, and it was dark. Carol was bringing some laundry in from their line at the back of the house, and that's when she saw him. Bell ringer? I replied. Yep, Chet said. He was walking out of the woods behind their house, and he walked right up into their yard. She asked who he was and where he was coming from. He said he was visiting some friends, but there wasn't anything out there past those woods but a cemetery. See, Chancellor in this part of the Midwest was getting a lot of activity from hobos back then. Guys home from the war just out walking the world, looking for a new place to settle, riding trains, figuring their shit out. And some people were pretty wary of that. The houses near edge of town in particular, they saw a lot of hobo signs on their fences, barns, cut into trees, What's a hobo sign? I asked. These little symbols that would tell hobos where to go for, like generous people or mean people, he replied. Who or where to avoid, where you could get a hot meal, little signals to each other kind of hidden in the landscape, so to speak. Wait, I said, taking out my phone. I brought up a picture of the recurring symbol. Is this one of those? A hobo sign? Chet squinted at it. It looks like it could be, but damn if I know what it means, he said. Anyway, Carol was a little spooky about hobos, and when she asked who this guy was, he said he was Adam's friend from the war. That's how he put it, his friend from the war. She said Adam wasn't home yet. Bellringer says, okay, then I'll come back. He starts off toward the woods again. Then he turns and he looks at Carol and he says, your baby is going to die. They didn't have a baby, right? I replied. They didn't know it, but yeah, they did, he said. Carol was 3 months pregnant and didn't know it at the time. Found out 2 weeks later when she miscarried. So Carol tells Adam about it when he gets home, and Adam, he goes out there in those woods with a shotgun looking for Bellringer. Comes back a few hours later, ash white, like he's just been to hell and back. Tells Carol to lock the doors, turn off the lights, and no matter what, not to answer the door if someone knocks. That's what Bellringer said to me, I said suddenly. Chet paused. Well, Carol didn't listen. Adam, he was in the basement getting things secured for whatever had scared him, and upstairs he hears knocking. Knocking on the front door that just doesn't stop. He goes running up there, yelling for Carol just in time to see her opening the door. And? I said. To be honest, no one knows who it was, Chet said. At that point, Adam didn't have a lot of friends in town. He'd been pretty depressed, and he was starting to really isolate. War trauma is what I think. But Carol, anyway, something happened. When she opened the door, this is according to Adam at the time, there was someone standing there in the dark, sort of wobbling as though they were having trouble standing up. I thought of the factory. The figure watching Vicky and I, holding onto the railing of the walkway, legs shaking as though they were about to fall. Who was it? I said. Like I said, I have no idea, Chet replied. Neither did Adam, but Carol, it did something to her. He says she stepped forward and whoever it was reached for her. He said their hands and arms were blackened as though they'd been burned, spindly, down to the tendons. The hands sort of drawn down, the fingers like flippers or feathers or something, all melted, mushed together. Big, old-timey looking pocket watch in their hand. And whoever it is just says one thing in this whispery, sort of sick-sounding voice. You'll know when it's time to go away. Adam pulls her, slams the door, locks it, practically picks her up and carries her upstairs. Hid in the bedroom with a shotgun till morning. Next morning, Adam wakes up and finds Carol sitting in bed, like not talking. Just like, well, she's coming down from a bad trip, if you're from my generation. Spacey, nervous, jumping at noises, just kind of talking nonsense. Like she'd had a nervous breakdown in a way. Asking Adam when they were going to have another baby. Asking when he'd gotten home. Just odd shit all around. Well, Adam decides he's too scared to take her to the hospital, afraid they'll ask questions he can't answer. He doesn't know what to do. So he goes out, he gets a bunch of groceries so they can stay in and try to figure things out. Calls in sick to work for a few days. When he gets home, all the mirrors in the house are broken. And Carol's sitting there in bed with a pillowcase tied around her head. What? I said. He says her name, asks her what's happening, and she says she sees him looking at her. And this way she can't see him. He takes it off, tries to comfort her. Next day, she's fine. Like she didn't remember any of it. Things are okay for a bit. A few months go by after that horrible night, and weird stuff starts happening around Chancellor. Just inexplicable little things. Weather's off, things like that. Adam comes home from work one day and finds Carol sitting at the kitchen table, wearing that pillowcase over her head again. Just sitting there, hands in her lap like a doll. Cup of coffee on the table that hasn't been touched. He says, honey? And he unties that pillowcase. She looks at him and says, it's almost time. And she looks like she's going to cry, and she winces and says, honey, my shoulder hurts. And Adam sees then at the pillowcase and her shoulder, all cut up and bloody. This hobo sign cut right into her skin. Next week, Adam quits his job, just stops showing up, won't answer the door. Back then, they didn't do things the way we do them now. There were no wellness checks, that sort of thing. If people wanted to disconnect from things, they just did it. Don't answer the phone, nothing. Well, one of Adam's buddies from work decides enough is enough, and he wants to see if he's okay. So this fella stops by the Hanna's house after work one evening. Sun's going down. Knocks on the door. No answer. So he goes around back. Back door is open. And he walks inside. Adam's sitting in the family room in the dark. And when this fella asks, hey, what's wrong? Adam doesn't even look at him. He just goes, I kept her safe for as long as I could. I didn't know what else to do. And before this guy can even say anything, Adam puts the shotgun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Needless to say, this guy freaks out. He runs upstairs thinking Carol must be there. How's he going to tell her what just happened? And in the bedroom, the bed's a stained mess. Sweat stains, blood stains, and these big, heavy chains wrapped around the posts piled up in the middle. No one there, though. He runs out of the house, and on his way back to the road, he sees a fire in the woods. He goes running out there thinking, someone started a fire or something, maybe Carol was there. Chet paused at this point and took a tightly rolled joint out of his pocket. He held it up as if an offering, and I shook my head. He shrugged, lit it, dragged, and sat back with his eyes closed before exhaling. The look on your face, Paul, says it all. You don't believe any of this, and I don't blame you. I didn't say that, I offered, but it's a bit far-fetched, imaginative. Or, hey, I've heard it before, Chet said. Crazy. He grinned as he inhaled and held his smoke again. Maybe I am crazy. Go on, I said. Yeah. Chet nodded. As he's moving through the woods, he sees there isn't just one fire, there's a bunch of them. A big ring of fires in this clearing. And he had just about run into Carol Hannes, walking through the woods in her nightgown. He reaches out and he grabs her shoulder, and she turns around and just stares at him. And she says, It's time to go away. And as she turns and she walks toward this clearing. He follows her real careful at this point, not sure what's going on. In the middle of these fires is a big chunk of rock, and she goes right up to it, lies down on it, and out of the woods come these things. 3 of them, wearing black choir robes and these crowns with candles on them. He said their faces were melting. I've heard about something with a melting face, I said. Sorry to bring it back to reality then, Chet said. I think they wear wax masks to hide their identities. Who are they? I said, remembering the mural at the glass factory, the 3 figures with dissolving features and the ring of fire around their heads. Van had looked at them like he knew who they were in horror and told me he didn't like them. I've only ever heard them referred to as the Black Lucia, he said. As to who they actually are, that's a real question. And I believe the answer changes over time. So there they come out of the woods, and before long, something else. Something bad. Let me guess, I said. Canter. That's what we call it, Chet chuckled. So here comes that damn horse thing, walks right up to that rock where Carol lies, and it just starts eating her. 2, 3 bites, and there's nothing but a sludgy mess on the rocks. This fella, he turns and he runs. Left Chancellor the next day. Ended up in an institution downstate, from what I understand. Said all he could hear when he tried to sleep was that woman's screams, like nothing he'd ever heard, like she'd just seen hell and had enough time to process what it was and what it meant. I tell you, I didn't believe in it for years. Who would? Not until I saw it myself. You've seen this canter, or whatever it is, I said. I believe so, Chet said. It wasn't like seeing you sitting in front of me, or he rapped his knuckles on the table. Touching this table, looking at it and saying to yourself, oh yeah, this is a table. It was more peripheral, I guess you'd say. Okay, so what does this Black Lucia want exactly? I said. What's the point? Is it just some black magic bullshit, or is there a purpose of some kind? Isn't it all black magic bullshit at some level? Chet chuckled. I can't answer that. My sense is they believe they're maintaining some sort of balance with the universe, tit for tat, you give us something, we let your crops survive. You'll have to go well past me for that answer, Paul. I'll tell you one other thing about them. I think they're just people. I think they're people right here. He jabbed at the air toward the floor. Right here. In Chancellor. People who've been here a long time. People who started to make connections on their own. Scared fucking people. Bellringer doesn't just talk to me, How do you know he's even connected to all this, playing devil's advocate? I said. Isn't it possible that he's just some weird guy hanging around town? Chet's tone turned mildly patronizing. That day Adam went out in the woods looking for Bellringer after he showed up and told Carol about the baby, Chet said. Adam found him. And Bellringer talked to him, told him things. Told him he'd come back, knocking on the door and not to answer it. That it'd be him, but it wouldn't be him. That it'd be the part of him that keeps time. That's how he put it. And then he showed Adam things in his head. Things Adam wrote down that are... Chet paused. Look, I listened to people tell me crazy shit on the radio for 20 years. All sorts of stories about all sorts of bizarre things. I'm not going to repeat what Adam said Bellringer told him. Showed him. If I was in Vegas, I'd say a lot of it had to do with sacrificing children, I replied. You probably wouldn't be completely off track, Chet said, his voice cracking a little. So this timekeeping thing, is that the key to all this? I said. No sooner were the words out of my mouth than there was a loud thump against the front of the house, what sounded like a knock on the door. I started to say something, but Chet held up his hand like an angry schoolteacher, suddenly and firmly. We sat there, motionless, my skin tingling with fear born out of Chet's obvious fear. After a solid minute, he crept toward the front door, measuring his footfalls and looking through the peephole at his porch. He sighed deeply with relief. A planter fell over in the wind, he said. What were you expecting? I said, unable to keep from chuckling at the insanity of the whole thing. Bell ringer? It's the end of a cycle, he said simply, as though it was obvious and I was a fool for not picking it up. So you never know, since it's almost over for a bit. What is? I said. The cycle, he said again. Carol Hannes was marked, that symbol in her flesh. She was one of many. Some of them we know about, some we don't. Some just disappear in darkness, people who won't be missed. It happened to Tanner, I said, putting the pieces together. She was marked to be sacrificed by this Black Lucia cult. Why? Why, I'm not sure, he said, but something happened, and based on what your dad said, they didn't get her. He hits her with his car, loses track of her. It's weird, but if they'd gotten her, if things had gone according to their plan, I think so many things that have happened since wouldn't have happened. Things get thrown off track. And when things get thrown off track, it's a mess for a while. Chaotic shit happening. And that's Bellringer, I said. No, Chet said, and he groaned, rubbing his head a little. Like I said, John just sort of opens the door. He shows up, and the cycle begins. And the cycle only ends one way. And if it doesn't end that way, then things get ugly. But John knows things about why this is all happening. Is that it? I said. I believe so, Chet said. And that's what I've been trying to parse from his weird-ass ramblings for decades. So Bellringer's told you things, I said. Chet looked at the floor, something like shame or fear straining his voice to a near whisper. Yes, he has. Many times. Chet put his hands on his hips as though about to tackle some sort of task. I need to use the facilities, Paul. I'll be right back. Chet disappeared down the hall, and I walked to the window and stared out at the street. In the distance, I could see a little piece of the storefronts that peppered Main Street on both sides. How many cars pass through in a given week, month, year? How many travelers going back and forth on a mission from somewhere to somewhere, people who the people here would never know and vice versa? Maybe they stop for a piece of pie at the diner. Maybe they gas up on the outskirts of town and talk to a couple of teenagers sneaking off to the lake to mess around. Something, who knows. They chat, just a few words, pleasantries. Then there's the drifter. Maybe someone more than just the quick pass-through. Someone who remains for a time. Exploring, learning, talking, and then taking what they've learned and going away. But maybe coming back, using what they've learned somehow. Putting hobo signs where it makes sense to put them. Using what they've learned about what scares people in a little town in the middle of nowhere. What would make them lock their doors and keep things to themselves. Turn a blind eye to horror. Maybe the drifter could use that. Fear is too strong a word. Specialized knowledge to further his own interests. What was John Bellringer's interest in Chancellor? Or, maybe more importantly, what was John Bellringer? Paul, Chet started as he came back into the room. I know this is... I'm glad you came to me, but at the same time, I don't want you to think that... What do you think Bellringer wants, Chet? I interrupted. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe it's enough for him just to tell us things. Maybe he just wants us to listen. What sort of things has he told you? I said. he muttered, refusing to make eye contact with me. Different things. Sometimes things that don't make sense, admittedly. Sometimes things that do. He once came here, one Sunday morning. Church bells are ringing just a few blocks away at the Presbyterian church, and he startled me, just appeared on my porch. He said he'd heard a song on the radio that he couldn't get out of his head, and the only words he could remember were about leaving a sleeping bag rolled up and stashed behind a couch. And he laughed like it was the funniest thing anyone had ever heard. And then he said how sad it made him to watch a plane crash on Valentine's Day a long time ago. What the fuck? I muttered, slumping back down in the chair. So, where do you think Margaret is in all this? He started. I'd venture to say that if Margaret turns up, she'll just have that same hobo symbol from some other dimension cut into her, he said. Poor child, I heard they arrested Van Evans for it. They did, I said. You think he did something to her? Not on your life. Chet rattled around in the kitchen cabinet, coming up with a package of graham crackers. He munched quietly, deep in thought. No, I'm betting Vangelis made some sort of connection, just like I have over the years. None of this happened overnight, Paul. I've had about 10 full nights of sleep in as many years trying to put all this together. It's part of why I have my show. You know, every now and again somebody would call in with some little tidbit I didn't have in my toolbox, if you know what I mean, and I could stick another piece of the puzzle together. I stared out the window. It was hard to allow myself even the possibility of belief that something inhuman, beyond our ability to understand, was out there just puttering about this small Midwestern town. But then again, what better place? To the world at large, towns like Chancellor were invisible. It was like an animal hiding in the thick undergrowth of a jungle, eluding a predator, or stalking prey. Chet, I said finally, was the Hannes house the same house where the Parsons family lived? How'd you figure that one? He said, genuine curiosity in his voice, followed by a little chuckle. Damn good one, Paul. Damn good one. You know, I think that house is a... My phone vibrated against my leg, and we both jumped as I checked the message. It was from Bill Manning. What is it? Chet said, reading my face. I looked at him, and in that one fleeting moment of eye contact, I think he knew before I even said it out loud. They found Margaret Summers. It was starting to mist, and the crowd gathered at the edges of the pit where Vicky and I had drank beers just a little over a week before, maintaining a respectful distance as the police swarmed around the scene. Given the circumstances, Sunset Park looked considerably different from the night we joked around in the company of beer bottle animals. The graffiti outline of Vicky's high school friend Garrett, the self-proclaimed steward of the pit, blended into the scene. Since we'd been there, someone had spray-painted on horrifying features to make it look as though the outlined figure was screaming from a mouth ringed with teeth, a nearly formless, howling creature. The rain started to pick up, and a bright moon attempted to break through the clouds as a pair of EMTs closed the doors on an ambulance about 20 yards away, where Margaret Summers sat on a gurney, nodding solemnly as they talked, her parents sitting next to her. The ambulance hit the lights and pulled out onto the highway. I saw Bill Manning through the confusion, and he nodded at me, engrossed in working through the details of the scene with his deputies. He looked as though he'd been dropped by parachute into a foreign country with no idea of why he was there in the first place. She's alive, Chet said flatly, staring at the activity of the scene as though it was under glass. I didn't imagine she'd be alive. Why is she? I said quietly. Residents were beginning to gather at the perimeter of the park in greater and greater numbers, and I'd already gotten a few looks that clearly indicated my status as an outsider, someone they didn't recognize. Someone must have found her, he said. Which means someone broke the cycle again, I replied. If you believe in that sort of thing, Chet said dryly. My dad believes that Tanner is still alive too, Chet, I said. Well, he said thoughtfully, I don't see how that's possible. But I guess I don't know everything. I feel like one of those old computers, you know, the big old boxy things. They were good in their day, they were slick, but they can only do so much, and now they're outpaced. Maybe you'll figure out more than I did. Hell, maybe your dad already has. Earlier at the bar, you mentioned that we had time to talk before Bellringer got there. Or whatever it was you said, I replied. Were you expecting Bellringer tonight? It's about time, Chet said. But I haven't seen him in quite a while. I almost hoped he'd show up at my door while you were there, he said. So you'd know. He pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders. I'm gonna go, Paul. If you need me, you know where to find me. He gave me a pat on the shoulder, the kind of brotherly affection that indicated a shared understanding of something deep and meaningful, and managed his way through the crowd. I waited there until some of the people dispersed, looking for Vicky, but I didn't see her anywhere. I texted, "Where are you?" and slipped my phone back in my pocket as Manning sauntered over to fill me in. From what the nurses and doctors could tell, Margaret Summers was okay, but she wasn't talking much. Of course, what had been the most confusing element was her clothes. It would come out over the course of the following day that they'd found the clothes she'd been wearing when she disappeared in Van's yard, and her shoes in the playhouse. But when asked where she'd gotten the clothes she was wearing when they found her, she'd said only, there were others. Her parents didn't want any more questioning after that, apparently, and who could blame them? The tags in her sweatshirt had the name Evelyn written on them in thick black pen, but no one immediately on the scene could figure out who that was or why Margaret would have some other child's clothes on. Finally, I decided to let the police do their job. Thankful at least, for the fact that the Summers family wasn't going to have to mourn their child that night. As I pulled into the driveway of the Rudder Mill house, my headlights landed on Vicky's bumper. I saw that a lamp was on inside, but I didn't see any movement. I no longer knew what to expect from something as seemingly harmless as a lamplight. I retrieved the crowbar from my trunk for the second time in a week and headed up the driveway to the back door. It was unlocked. I went inside and locked it behind me, propping a chair under the knob, then went to the front door and did the same. I heard a dull squeak upstairs, as though someone had strained a floorboard with the slightest movement, and I crept around to the bottom of the staircase. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I took the steps as carefully and quietly as I could. I opened the door to the bedroom from where the lamplight emanated and stifled a gasp. Vicky was lying in the bed on top of the covers, wearing a t-shirt and jeans. There was a pillowcase pulled around her head like a hood, and she was motionless, the pillow from which she'd stripped the case lying on the floor next to the bed. Even though she lay there without moving a muscle and I couldn't see her face, I had the unsettling feeling that she was awake, though I had no reason to think so. "Vicky?" I said quietly, slipping the pillowcase from her head. Her eyes were closed and her lips were slightly parted. She was asleep. "Hey." I shook her a little and her eyes gradually opened. She groaned, groggy. "Vicky, what are you doing here?" "Paul?" she said. "He told me to wait. He said you'd be back soon and you'd know what to do." "Who?" I said, slipping my hand behind her to steady her and help her sit up. "What would I know to do?" Before she could answer, she winced at the touch of my hand. My fingers were wet, and when I drew them back, they were bloody. I gently eased her body forward into my arms, and there, carved into the nape of her neck, was the hobo symbol, and the cuts were fresh.
You have been listening to Cicatrix, Episode 7, Empty Places. Cicatrix is a production of Sensory Eclipse Media with funding from the estate of Vincent Galt and has been transcribed and produced by Christopher Bevard. For more information on this and other podcasts from Sensory Eclipse, as well as more information regarding the ongoing mystery of Richard Harmon's disappearance, please visit www.sensoryeclipse.com. Original music and score by the Crone Hex. Check them out at thecronehex.bandcamp.com. Thank you for listening.